Hello, and welcome to the channel. As you could probably gather from the title of this video, we're looking into a case of a family annihilation. These kinds of cases, for me, are always hard to fathom, and rarely do I walk away from stories like this understanding the mentality of the individual, or individuals at the time. However, after researching this case, I can assure you that the murders were far from the only thing that was shocking about this story. At approximately 2 p.m. on the 6th of May 1976, police received a call to report a suspicious vehicle that had been abandoned near 140 South Whippy in West Chicago. The vehicle, a maroon 1972 Thunderbird, had been left in poor condition. The hubcaps had been removed, as was the ignition. The front window of the car, which had an Elk Grove Village sticker attached to it, had also been smashed. After learning that the car hadn't been reported stolen, they traced the owner of the vehicle back to Frank Columbo, a resident of Elk Grove Village, which was a suburb located approximately 20 miles northwest of Chicago. Calls were made to the Columbo family home, but nobody answered. The next day, on the 7th of May, a police officer would visit the Columbo residence to inform them that they were in possession of Frank's car. However, immediately upon arriving, he knew something was terribly wrong. As he approached the Columbo's home, he noticed that there were uncollected newspapers laying outside of the front of the home, which had been there for several days. He also spotted that the front door to the home was slightly ajar. The officer knocked lightly on the door, hoping someone would respond, but the only thing he could hear would be a dog barking repeatedly from deep within the home. Understandably concerned with what he was experiencing, the officer took no risks and returned to his car and radioed for backup. While waiting, he would check around the outside of the house, finding little to suggest anything out of the ordinary. That would all change when the backup arrived, and both he and the other officer entered the home together. There, lying face up, was 43-year-old Frank Columbo. Clearly there had been foul play, as glass laid all around him, and they would find a crystal lampshade covered in blood close by. As the pair continued through the home, they stumbled across the lifeless body of Frank's wife, Mary Columbo. The 40-year-old was found on the landing just outside the bathroom, laying face up. She had been shot between the eyes, and a 1-inch cut could be seen on her throat. Her underwear was also pulled down around her ankles. After finding Mary, the officers decided to leave the home to call in to report what they had found so far. Shortly after doing so, an investigative team and evidence technicians swooped onto the Elk Grove Village home, with the first investigators arriving at approximately 5 p.m. Investigator Raymond Rose, one of the first to arrive at the scene, entered the home. He observed the bodies of Frank and Mary, noting that a large diamond ring that Mary was wearing on her finger was still there. Also, despite finding her purse on the bathroom floor with all its contents removed, nothing appeared to be missing from it. As Raymond continued through the home, he found 4 teeth laying between the top of the stairs and the wall. He would continue searching through the home, where he would enter the bedroom of Frank and Mary's son, Michael Columbo. Michael, 13 years old at the time, was tragically found dead on the floor in his room. He too had been shot in the head, and it was apparent that he had been beaten with a bowling trophy that had been found beside him, as well as being stabbed multiple times in the face, chest and neck with a pair of sewing scissors which were found on Michael's desk. A 9-inch knife was found outside of the home, lying next to the front stoop, and a steak knife was also located near a rock garden. Raymond would quickly rule out the likelihood of it being a robbery gone wrong. Attempts to make it look this way were found in crumpled magazines. Rubbish had been sprawled across the floor of the kitchen. The phone was off its hook, and cabinets around the home had been opened. However, there was no indication that any valuables had been taken. For example, no electrical goods such as TVs or stereos had been removed. Several guns were found in the home that belonged to the Columbos, including a .40 caliber shotgun, which had not been moved from where they had been stored. There was also a wall safe in the home which contained $5,000 in cash that showed no signs that there were attempts to open it, and besides the front door being left ajar, all other windows and doors had been secured. To Rose, it was apparent that the Columbo family had been massacred in a cold, brutal manner. The need to apprehend the person or persons behind the killings began. However, not all of the Columbo family were in the home. Frank and Mary also had a 19-year-old daughter, Patricia Columbo, who seemingly escaped the same fate as her family. While locals began swooping to the home, naturally intrigued by all the goings-on, there was no sign of Patricia. Raymond Rose instructed officers to track her down and bring her in for questioning, firstly to ensure her safety, as the Columbo phone book was found open on the page with her contact details, but also to see if she had any knowledge as to who would do such a thing to her family. Patricia Columbo, known also as Patty to those close to her, was tracked down a few hours later and informed of the news that her family had been killed. She attended the police station as was asked of her, whereby she spoke with police. During their conversation, she explained that her father had deep connections with the Chicago Mafia, much to the surprise of officers, as this was news to them, and that he had operated a chop shop behind the scenes at the auto parts store where he worked at. Patricia went on to say that she suspected it was a mob hit, whereby the killers retreated to West Chicago after carrying out the deed. This will be an interesting point that I'll pick up on later. Officers took note of this potential lead, but this wasn't the only thing they took notice of. While people can express grief in a wide variety of ways, especially such shocking news as that which was given to Patricia, they couldn't help but notice how calm she was. Not only this, but Patricia was openly flirting with the male officers at the station. Something didn't sit right with officers at that point, and Patricia, unbeknownst to her, had just been added to their list of people to monitor. The following day, May 8th, the Cook County Chief Medical Examiner carried out autopsies on Frank, Mary, and Michael. Frank was first, where it was found he sustained irregular lacerations consistent with a blunt object. This was likely from the crystal lamp beside Frank, or the bowling ball trophy found in Michael's room. They also determined that he'd been shot 4 times in the head and face. The teeth found on the top of the stairs were confirmed to be his, and he had also been stabbed repeatedly. Next was Mary Columbo. Her death was determined to have been caused by the single gunshot to her head. The cut to her throat was carried out after the fact, and despite being found in the sexually exposed manner as she was, there were no signs that she had been inappropriately abused. Then there was Michael. This for me was the hardest to learn. Based on the chief medical examiner's findings, Michael appeared to have slept through what had happened to his parents and was woken up by his killers, who forced him to stand up, where he was then shot at point-blank range in the head. Afterwards, he was then bludgeoned with a blunt instrument and was stabbed more than 90 times. The examiner noted that the puncture wounds were relatively shallow, likely caused by a woman. This theory was further bolstered when a single strand of hair was found on the front of Michael's t-shirt, which wasn't his. Their deaths were determined to be approximated between 11 p.m. on the 4th of May and 1 a.m. on the 5th. This was based on the contents of their stomach and stage of their decomposition. At around the same time, work was being done to gather evidence on Frank Columbo's car. With the Thunderbird now at the police department garage, the Elk Grove Village PD evidence technician got to work with gaining access to the boot of the car. Once he managed to pry it open, he found maroon or red smudges inside. Unfortunately, it was not possible to determine what this was due to contamination, but it could have been either blood or grease. He was, however, able to lift fingerprints from the boot of the car and the wing, and interestingly, the left handprint extracted didn't seem to contain a print of the person's index finger. This was either because the finger didn't make an impression, or there was no finger to leave one. Glass fragments were also found inside the car, which upon examination were determined to potentially be from the broken lamp found in the Columbo's home. Takeout bags from a fast food restaurant were also found inside the car, as well as an artificial plant stalk that was covered in blood that matched the same fake plant found nearby Mary. Meanwhile, that same day, police were also out searching for Mary's car. They struck gold. About 5 miles outside of Elk Grove Village, in a parking lot, was Mary's 1972 Oldsmobile 98. Both cars had been found on the west side of Chicago, which was interestingly where Patricia said the mobsters who killed her family would have fled back to. Inside Mary's car were a few cigarette butts and a blanket which had been left in the back of the car, but nothing seemed out of place. There was no internal or external damage to the car, and a witness would state that on the 5th of May at around 5:30 a.m, the car wasn't parked there as he left for work. However, by the time he returned home 12 hours later, the car was there. The Oldsmobile was examined by evidence technicians who were able to extract 5 fingerprints and identify 2 different types of cigarette butts from the ashtray and blankets. The funerals for Frank, Mary, and Michael Columbo would take place on the 10th of May 1976 at Windridge Memorial Park and Nature Sanctuary, Illinois. Given the nature of their deaths, detectives were set to attend the funeral also. However, instead of sending their lead investigators, as they would usually do, they decided to do something a little different. Noticing how odd Patricia's behaviour was at the precinct a few days prior, they instead decided to send a younger, more attractive officer. Patricia attended the funeral with her boyfriend, a man named Frank DeLuca, who was 37 years old and 18 years Patricia's senior. Despite this, DeLuca sat to one side of the proceedings, whereas Patricia behaved in ways that could only be described as theatrical. At times, she was openly flirting with the young police officer, right in the view of DeLuca, who didn't seem to be bothered by her actions. At other times, she was arguing with her uncle, as she wanted her parents and brother cremated, despite them being devoutly Catholic. She would also be observed laughing and joking outside of the church, as though there wasn't a care in her world, to throwing herself onto the closed caskets of her family members when the time seemed appropriate to do so. Needless to say, her behaviour that day only served to turn suspicions towards her, especially by the police, who were even more convinced that Patricia knew more than she was letting on. It also didn't help her case that investigators checked into her claims of Frank's mob connections and came out blank. But who exactly is Patricia Columbo? To better understand how we got to this stage, we need to go back and examine her life in more detail. Patricia Columbo was born on the 21st of June 1956. In her formative years, she was idolised by both her mother and father, but Frank considered Patty to be the apple of Frank's eye. He would treat her like a princess and call her as such. This would change when Patricia was 6 years old. When Michael came into the world, the attention that was solely placed on Patricia now had to be divided between 2 children. However, Frank and Mary, concerned with how Patricia would take to being an older sister, encouraged her to be involved heavily with her brother. There are mixed accounts as to the treatment of her brother, as some would say that Patty treated Michael very lovingly, almost as a second maternal figure, while others would say that she became jealous over the attention Frank would give to his only son, causing her to grow resentful over their growing bond. As Patricia grew into her teenage years, she began to rebel from her parents, and she soon became incredibly interested in boys her age, and even older men. Her behaviour became increasingly wild and uncontrollable, much to the annoyance of her old-fashioned father. By the time she was 16, Patricia dropped out of high school. In a bid to curtail her wild behaviour, her parents got her a job working in a cafe. It was here that she would meet Frank DeLuca. Patricia, upon seeing DeLuca for the first time, became instantly attracted, and despite being only 16 years old at the time, she lied to him about her age, telling him that she was 18 years old. DeLuca himself also lied about his age, claiming to be in his 20s, despite being 34 at the time. What DeLuca also omitted from Patricia was that he was in fact married with 5 children. The pair would strike up an intense relationship, and DeLuca would eventually convince Patricia to work with him at Walgreens, where he worked as a pharmacy manager. While working there, she stole credit cards from 2 of her colleagues and racked up thousands in credit card debt. When she was caught out, her father made Patricia pay back the money she stole, but Patricia was still sentenced to 2 years probation in July 1974. DeLuca was known around the community to be promiscuous, often attending swinging parties, and Patricia was more than willing to participate in his lifestyle, often engaging in sexual relations with other women, while her partner took photos and recorded what they were doing. There were also times where Patricia would engage in indecent acts with DeLuca's German Shepherd, which he would also record and take photos of. Going back to Patty's relationship with DeLuca, she would eventually come clean about her age, and DeLuca would too. He would also reveal the truth about his marriage, but he convinced Patricia that he would divorce his wife Marilyn in order to commit himself to her. Incredibly, he asked Patricia to move in with him and his family, to which she agreed. Her parents, unaware of the reality of DeLuca's personal life, agreed for their daughter to move in with him. Here, they would continue their unorthodox lifestyle. Eventually, Frank and Mary would become aware of Frank DeLuca's real age, and also the kind of relationship that they were in. Needless to say, they were less than impressed. Patricia would continue to live with the DeLuca family until the summer of 1975, when she returned to her parents. She told her father that she was done with the DeLucas and the lifestyle that she was living. Frank was undoubtedly excited to learn that his daughter had finally seen sense. Patricia wanted a fresh start and asked her parents if they could help with finding her a new place to live. They agreed, and Frank helped Patricia find a new home in Lombard, a small village located approximately 15 miles from Elk Grove village. Frank had also agreed to pay Patricia's monthly rent. However, the truth was that Patricia had never left Frank DeLuca. In fact, it was all a plot to get Patricia and DeLuca a private space to continue their extreme love affair. For a while, the Columbo family were oblivious, but when Frank eventually found out he had been lied to, he was furious. In August 1975, a livid Frank Columbo approached Patricia and Frank DeLuca at the Walgreens car park where the pair both worked. He aggressively told DeLuca to leave his daughter alone, but he refused. A violent confrontation ensued, culminating when Frank Columbo pulled a rifle on DeLuca and aimed it at his head. "I'm going to blow your head off," Frank told DeLuca. Frank then proceeded to hit DeLuca in the mouth with the butt of his rifle, knocking out several of his front teeth. As DeLuca attempted to get up, he struck him again, this time in his stomach. Allegedly, DeLuca said that Frank told him, "You're dead, you motherfucker." Patricia would report Frank Columbo to police, and he would be charged with assault and be placed in jail, although the charges would be quickly dropped after Patricia withdrew her complaint. It's believed that around this time, Frank Columbo had ridden his daughter out of the family will, unbeknownst to her. In September 1975, Marilyn DeLuca had begun divorce proceedings against her husband. Apparently she too had had enough. For the next year, there was little contact between the Columbos and their daughter. That was until 1976, where in the late winter or early springtime, after learning that Patricia and Frank were going to marry, they seemingly resigned themselves to the fact that their relationship wasn't going to end quickly, and so they began to work on healing their broken relationship. With Frank DeLuca's divorce set to be finalised at the end of May, he and Patricia planned to wed in June 1976. By this time, Frank DeLuca said that his soon-to-be in-laws had accepted he and Patricia's relationship and even wanted to purchase a new washer and dryer as a wedding gift. On the 12th of May, 5 days after the gruesome discovery, Patricia and Frank DeLuca were asked to provide fingerprints as part of the police's ongoing investigation. When DeLuca provided his prints, it was noticed by officers that he was missing his left index finger. 2 days later, officers were speaking with car salesman Lanny Mitchell. Lanny, who had first met Patricia in September 1975, told investigators that he offered money to Patricia to go out with a friend of his, 34-year-old Roman Subzinski. Patricia agreed, telling Lanny she needed the money, despite living with her boyfriend. She also went into detail regarding the events that took place in the Walgreens car park the month before. In October 1975, Patricia met up with Lanny and Roman at the Where Else Lounge, where the trio drank and danced for much of the night. Lanny explained to officers that it was at this meetup that Patricia first mentioned the idea of having her family killed. You see, Patricia believed that Lanny was actually someone who could be considered hired help. She went into great detail about the animosity that brewed between her and her family. Lanny then told her that he would kill her parents for up to $20,000. It's worth noting that he would swiftly tell investigators that he and Roman had absolutely no intention of carrying out the act, but he believed that by agreeing to, he could convince Patricia to sleep with him, as well as extract money from the couple. Throughout the remainder of October, Patricia contacted Lanny several times, wanting to know when he would complete the hit. He initially stalled Patricia by asking her for a rundown of the family's daily activities and schedules. Patricia provided him with the floor plans to the home, as well as locations to their TVs, radios, wall safe, expensive furs, and jewellery. By November, Patricia was pressing Lanny again for a date where he'd carry out the act. She apparently set a target for it to be carried out before Christmas, considering it to be a twisted Christmas present for her. By now, Roman was aware of the situation and demanded the money up front. Patricia refused, stating that the money would be available once the life insurance had been paid out, money that she was no longer entitled to, but instead offered to sleep with both men in a bid to keep them on side. They agreed. After they were done, Patricia provided photographs of her family and an extensive list of the family's activities. In December, Patricia and Lanny went to the Columbo home, with the idea behind it being Patricia wanting Lanny to case the residence. When Lanny saw Mary open her front door, he drove away panicking. Patricia would later meet up with Lanny and told him that she and Mary had argued over Frank DeLuca and stated that she wanted him to kill her parents that night. Patricia left the patio door open for Lanny to enter, but he never did. A month later, Patricia told both Roman and Lanny that her younger brother would also need to be offed, due to the possibility that he may work out that Patricia was responsible for their parents' deaths. She would again leave the patio door unlocked, and again nothing would come of it. By the middle of March, both Patricia and DeLuca were becoming concerned that Lanny and Roman weren't going to follow through with the agreement. They would ask the pair when they were likely to go through with the hit, as well as reiterating to Lanny that neither she nor DeLuca had any more money to give. With this information, Patricia Columbo was arrested on the 15th of May 1976, 10 days after her parents and younger brother were discovered. Frank DeLuca was also arrested. Both were charged with conspiracy, solicitation, and the murders of Frank, Mary, and Michael Columbo. Patricia would provide a written and oral statement admitting to the solicitation of the murder of her entire family, but denied all knowledge of the events themselves. She'd also deny knowing Lanny, but she quickly changed her tune when he was presented to her, as he was in another examination room at the time. Patricia also claimed that she was forced at gunpoint to provide the dossier about her family to Lanny and Roman, but this was later discredited by a handwriting expert. She also claimed the pair forced her to have sex with them. Frank DeLuca, meanwhile, was released on the 17th of May, 1976. When detectives questioned Roman Subsinski, he initially remained tight-lipped. However, on the 26th of May 1976, police offered him immunity in exchange for information. Roman accepted and proceeded to corroborate everything that Lanny Mitchell had told them beforehand. He also added that he had spoken to Frank DeLuca, who claimed that Frank Columbo had himself put out a hit on his life. DeLuca also told Roman that Michael would also need to be eliminated. Frank DeLuca would be rearrested on the 17th of July 1976 and placed into Cook County Jail, where he would await his trial. He would share a cell with a man named Clifford Childs for the next 6 months. Childs alleged that DeLuca openly bragged about the Columbo murders, calling it the perfect crime. He told Childs that he was the one who shot each member. Frank DeLuca told Childs that their plan was to reconcile with the Columbos after the pair grew impatient with Lanny and Roman. On the night of the murders, the couple were due to meet up at the Columbos at 8 p.m, but he purposely delayed their arrival until 10 p.m, as he wanted to ensure he established an alibi at Walgreens. When the pair arrived, Frank Columbo answered the door. As Frank made his way upstairs, DeLuca pulled a .32 caliber revolver and shot him in the back of the head. After shooting Frank, DeLuca and Patricia then found Mary and shot her at point-blank range. They then proceeded to Michael's room, where they found the young boy sleeping. They woke him up, forced him to stand up, and like his parents, he was shot. Patricia was responsible for the bludgeoning and vicious attacks on her family after they were killed. They then roughed up the home, and DeLuca stole $150 to make it look like a robbery, as well as other items, which they put into Frank Columbo's Thunderbird and drove it to West Chicago, in the hopes that by leaving it in a rough area, the car would be broken into. In a bid to avoid detection, Frank DeLuca wore gloves and stuffed the left index finger to throw off police. DeLuca also told Childs that 2 Walgreens colleagues were going to provide witness testimonies against him and that he needed them killed. He asked Childs, who agreed to this on the condition he paid the money for his bail, as well as pay him $10,000 for each hit. DeLuca agreed and provided physical descriptions of the staff members, one of which was a woman whom he had an affair with prior to meeting Patricia. Stunningly, Marilyn, Frank DeLuca's ex-wife, would be the one who would post bail for Clifford Childs. She sent 2 money orders on the 25th of November 1976 totaling $4,230, and on the 24th of February 1977, she picked up Clifford and took him to her home, where she paid him a further $1,300 and gave him DeLuca's car. However, like Lanny and Roman, Clifford had no intention whatsoever in going through with the hit. He would tell police his motives were purely to extract money from the DeLucas. After a month-long trial in 1977, Patricia Columbo and Frank DeLuca were found guilty for their crimes and sentenced to 200 to 300 years for the murders of the Columbo family, 150 years for conspiracy to commit murder, plus an additional 50 years for the solicitation to commit murder. Frank DeLuca would move for a new trial on the 25th of July 1977, while Patricia would do the same on the 8th of August that same year. Both motions would be declined. Furthermore, the pair had requests for appeals declined in 1983. In 2014, DeLuca was up for parole in front of the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. At the time of the hearing, he indicated having no expectation of being paroled due to the severity of his crime. He stated that what he and Patricia did was horrendous and that they should never leave prison. The parole board agreed, and his parole was denied. To this day, he remains in prison. His health has deteriorated over the years, suffering with prostate problems and requiring a cane to walk. Patricia was sent to Dwight Correctional Center, where in 1979, she was alleged to have been part of a scandal involving arranging sexual encounters with fellow female inmates and prison guards. Her disciplinary record, according to her 2014 parole hearing, recorded 20 tickets, with none of these being related to violence. She also obtained various educational degrees in the years since, including a bachelor's degree from Illinois State University, an associate degree in arts, an applied science degree in computer programming, and a secretarial science degree. She has also held various jobs in prison, including being a clerk and programmer for leisure time services, and in 2014, she was a special needs worker on the mental health unit at Logan Correctional Center, where she was transferred to after Dwight Correctional Center closed in 2013. Her parole was also denied. The earliest that both will be eligible for release, providing future parole hearings are also unsuccessful, will be 2116. Neither have seen each other since their 1977 conviction. On the morning of the 12th of March 2011, Rachel Oesterreich, a Lululemon store manager, arrived at work to prepare opening up the popular athletic store. Upon entering, she noticed that the place was an utter mess. She would call out, suspecting that she wasn't alone. She was right. A voice moaned back to her at the back of the store. Frightened for her safety, she would exit the store and call 911. While on the phone, a man named Ryan Hoare was arriving to open up the Apple store next door to Lululemon. He would witness what was going on, and upon learning what Rachel encountered, he offered to go inside and search the store. What he, and eventually Rachel, would witness would shock the affluent neighborhood of Bethesda, Maryland, and spark a murder investigation that would attract nationwide attention. When Ryan entered the Lululemon store, he found the place in utter disarray. It appeared as though the store had been completely ransacked, and what was more concerning was that as he went deeper into the store, he found blood spattered all over the walls and even on the ceiling. With it now being evident that the voice who moaned to Rachel earlier had been attacked, Ryan made the choice to go in deeper and try to find whoever it was. As he did so, he would first stumble across the body of a woman who was lying face down in a pool of blood. He could see that she wasn't moving, and it was apparent she had been dead for some time. Knowing the voice from earlier couldn't have come from the woman he was looking at now, Ryan bravely made the decision to keep searching. He would eventually find a second woman in the Lululemon store bathroom. She was zip-tied and appeared to be badly beaten, and she was also bleeding quite badly, but she was alive. Ryan had found the woman responsible for the moaning and rushed out to tell Rachel, who was still on the phone to the police. When police arrived, they quickly secured the area and went inside the store. They too would notice the condition of the store, as well as the sheer amount of blood located all over. They'd also find the two women that Ryan discovered. Concerned over the condition of the second woman, she'd be released from the zip ties and she'd be rushed to hospital to assess her physical state. Rachel Oesterreich unsurprisingly knew both women. They were her colleagues Jayna Murray and Brittany Norwood. Born on the 22nd of November 1980, Jayna was described by her friends as being a thrill seeker and an adventurous woman. In fact, on the 10th of December 2010, she uploaded a video of herself bungee jumping. Before graduating from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. with a Bachelor of Science degree in 2003, she would spend 2 years at St. Louis University in Madrid, Spain. At the time of her death, she was working towards obtaining a Master of Communication and Master in Business Administration at Johns Hopkins University, Washington. Her final paper that she was writing was about Lululemon. Jayna was a well-liked person who loved animals, travelling and dancing. It was no surprise that her passing had impacted her friends and family greatly. Tragically, her boyfriend at the time was planning to propose to her. Brittany Norwood was assessed at hospital, and while she had sustained multiple cuts and lacerations to her body, they were mostly superficial wounds which were easily treatable. Knowing this, police decided to interview her that night on the 12th of March to understand what took place in the store while her memory was still fresh. Brittany told police that their shift at Lululemon had been a relatively quiet one, with nothing of note happening. The pair closed up the store as normal, and by 9:45 p.m. that evening, the pair had locked up and said their goodbyes. However, as Brittany was making her way home, she reached into her bag to pull out her Metro card, only to realise she had left her wallet in the staff room. Left with little choice, she reached out to Jayna in the hope she would be willing to come back, as Jayna was the one with the keys to the store. Expecting her to be annoyed with her request, it turned out Jayna was more than happy to help out, as she had also left her laptop at the store, and so the pair agreed to meet up to collect their belongings. When Jayna and Brittany reconvened at Lululemon, Jayna unlocked the store and the pair entered. But as they did, 2 men donning all black and wearing ski masks ambushed the pair. They forced the women into the store, and after restraining the terrified women, they proceeded to beat and sexually assault them both. Brittany would say that Jayna resisted, which caused the 2 men to ferociously attack her, killing her in the process. Brittany also told police that throughout her ordeal, a coat hanger had been used on her. It goes without saying that such a horrific crime that took place in an otherwise safe, affluent neighbourhood caused shockwaves across Bethesda and the nation as a whole. Police carried out a detailed investigation of the store itself to find any clues that could catch these 2 twisted individuals. 2 male shoe prints had been imprinted onto the blood on the floor that were determined to belong to a person with a shoe size 14. They also found that the safes had been cleared out, indicating that the motive may have initially been robbery, but later became an opportunistic attack once Jayna and Brittany came back. When investigators requested CCTV footage of the store, they were disappointed to find that Lululemon didn't contain any internal cameras, but there was an external one placed outside the door to the store. Upon reviewing the footage, they found that 2 men wearing all black had walked past the store shortly before the attack. Believing this to be a solid lead, they would look into this further in the hopes of identifying the 2 men. There was good news and bad news. The good news was that they successfully identified the men, but the bad news was that the men were unconnected to the murder, as they were simply walking home from work that night and had rock-solid alibis. Police also spoke with staff who were working at the Apple store that night, where they learned that they overheard voices coming from the Lululemon store. At around 10 p.m, they could hear one woman saying,
"Talk to me. Don't do this. Talk to me. What's going on?"
This was shortly followed by blood-curdling screams, and they could hear her crying for help, screaming, quote,
"God help me. Please help me."
While they didn't report what they heard to police, it was understood that they were disturbed enough for one staff member to complain to security, but it emerged that they didn't follow up on the complaint. While the police investigation was ongoing, Mary Ripple, the medical examiner tasked with carrying out Jayna Murray's autopsy, got to work. She would identify 331 separate wounds on Jayna's body, with 105 of these wounds being defensive injuries. There were multiple cuts, abrasions, and cutting wounds across her face and body. It was determined that there were at least 5 tools used to inflict Jayna's injuries, tools which were determined to have come from a toolbox located near Jayna. This included a knife, hammer, rope, a box cutter, and merchandise peg. What was even more tragic was that Mary concluded her attack had lasted approximately 15 minutes, and she'd been alive throughout the vast majority of the ordeal. It was determined that the death blow came from a knife wound located on the back of her neck, which snapped her spinal cord and penetrated into her brain. What Mary wasn't able to find was any sign that Jayna had been sexually assaulted, despite Brittany's assertion that they had both been. Interestingly, despite the fact that the pants both women were wearing had been cut in the crotch area, Brittany too was examined, and like Jayna, there was no sign that she too had been sexually assaulted, which was in direct conflict with her claims. Furthermore, a forensic examination on Brittany's clothes showed that both hers and Jayna's blood was present. 2 days later, Brittany was visited by police at her home to talk again. They asked her why she seemed to get off significantly lightly compared to Jayna. Brittany's response was that the masked men apparently said that she was fun to f off. She also told police that they allegedly used racial slurs while abusing her. When she was pressed on why Jayna's blood was found on her, she explained this away by saying the men had pushed her onto Jayna. Brittany was asked to visit the police station again on the 16th of March 2011 to provide fingerprint and DNA samples in order to rule her out as a suspect. While she was there, she was asked about Jayna's car, specifically whether she knew what it looked like. Brittany told police that she didn't. By now, police were beginning to question Brittany's story. Alongside the evidence showing no sexual assault had taken place, police identified that the shoe prints found in the blood came from shoes Lululemon provide customers when trying on clothes. These shoes aren't for sale. Additionally, police also thought it odd that the killers would not bring their own weapons, instead resorting to using tools found within the store. It also didn't help Brittany that her DNA was found all over Jayna's car, a car that she couldn't even describe to police. The next day, March 17th, Brittany's brother Chris and sister Marissa reached out to police and told them that Brittany had more information for them about Jayna's car, but was too scared to share this with them. It was then arranged for Brittany to speak with police again on the 18th of March to divulge this new information. Brittany would say that prior to being sexually assaulted, she was instructed by both men to move Jayna's car. Unbelievably, she said that the men allowed her to do this alone, but said that they knew where she lived, and should she try to flee or call police, they would find out and kill her whole family. While she was expressively telling police how afraid for her life she was, they stopped her. By now, police were convinced that the two men didn't exist, and that Brittany knew more than she was letting on. More accurately, they were convinced she was responsible for Jayna Murray's murder. To understand the rationale behind Brittany Norwood killing Jayna Murray, we need to go back to the beginning to build a bigger picture. Born in Seattle, Washington, on the 19th of May 1982, Brittany came from a large family which consisted of 8 siblings, 4 brothers and 4 sisters. Her life growing up seemed to be very good, in that her parents were well educated and provided their children with a loving atmosphere. Financially, they were stable, with her father, Earl Norwood, owning his own business. Growing up, Brittany was incredibly passionate about sports, in particular football, or soccer for my American audience. She made the difficult decision to leave for New York to join Stony Brook University. Here she joined Stony Brook Seawolves in 2001 as a defender, and impressed in her first season, with her being selected to the all-rookie team in her first season. She would be named in the NSCAA Adidas All-Northeast Region team in 2002, as well as being named in the Soccer Buzz All-Northeast Region team that same year. As a defender, she was quoted as being a linchpin of the squad, and was clearly talented given the recognition and plaudits she was receiving. But things would soon change, after it became apparent that Brittany couldn't be trusted by her own teammates. Soon after joining the team, her classmates noticed that personal items, such as makeup or small amounts of money, would go missing. Brittany would be confronted over the missing items and admitted to stealing them. From that moment, the trust was broken. Brittany would see her game time reduced, and her teammates would spend less time with her, which would have a negative impact on Brittany mentally. After leaving school, she would work various jobs and remain active, but the issue of stealing would remain a focal point for her, with Brittany reportedly stealing from her places of work, leading to her being fired as a result. She did have ambitions though. Brittany wanted to become a personal trainer and one day own her own gym. But for now, she was working at Lululemon, and just like before, things began going missing. On the night of the 11th of March, as Jayna and Brittany were closing up, Jayna conducted a bag check and found a pair of yoga leggings with the security tag still attached. When Jayna confronted Brittany, Brittany would tell her that she bought the leggings from another colleague and the tags had been mistakenly left on. Jayna, however, was unconvinced, and Brittany suspected this. Fearing that Jayna would report her findings to management, she came up with the idea to lure her back to Lululemon. There she confronted Jayna and attempted to persuade her not to report her to management, but Jayna had already done so, around 6 minutes after locking up. It was at this moment that Brittany began her attack. Jayna fled to the back and tried to escape out of a back door, but Brittany caught up with her, and over the course of the next 15 to 20 minutes, Jayna was subjected to utter hell. After Brittany killed Jayna, she moved Jayna's car and remained there for approximately an hour and a half. She used the size 14 shoes to leave footprints in Jayna's blood to make it appear as though men had gotten in. She then proceeded to cut holes into the crotch area of both their trousers, as well as injure and tie herself up in the bathroom, and she remained there until she and Jayna would be found the next morning. Brittany Norwood was arrested on the 18th of March 2011 for the murder of Jayna Murray, and her trial began in late October that same year, which would last 8 days. She would be found guilty of the first-degree murder on the 2nd of November 2011, after a jury deliberated for just 1 hour. On the 27th of January 2012, Brittany Norwood was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Norwood would later appeal her conviction, arguing that her constitutional rights were infringed, as her Miranda rights were not read to her. But this was thrown out on the 29th of April 2015, subsequently ending any chance of her being released. As far as cases go, this is one of the more senseless stories I've covered. While there's never a good excuse to end someone's life in cold blood, to do so because of a pair of leggings is utterly beyond me. Instead of accepting responsibility for her own actions, Brittany is now rotting away in Maryland Correctional Institute for Women. She's never being released, and I hope Jayna's friends and family can find some solace in that. Others who have covered this story have also looked at the culture within Lululemon, but for me I don't really think this was too relevant to the story. While I can agree that some aspects of their business do seem weird from the outside looking in, overall I believe Brittany simply couldn't handle the shame of being caught stealing again, and it was this that was the driving force behind what she did. Besides, many companies these days try to instill their values and ideals onto their staff. Lululemon isn't really different in that respect. Perhaps they were just ahead of the curve. As a true crime content creator, I've come across many kinds of cases in my search for the next story to cover. These range from horrific tales that shock and disgust me, stories that inspire others, or unsolved crimes that I want to bring attention to. However, there's one type of case that I've only covered once. If you're familiar with the story of Greg Flanagan, you'll know that his was a story that would sound like it came from an episode of Jonathan Creek, something I mentioned in that video. And so today we'll be looking at a similar case, involving murder and a locked room mystery that would take several years before the shocking truth would be uncovered. Today's story starts on the 22nd of August 1922, where police were called to the Oesterreich's Los Angeles home overlooking Sunset Boulevard after receiving calls from concerned neighbours who could hear screaming and gunshots from inside the property. Upon arrival, they could hear a woman's cries for help from inside. Forcing their way in, they searched the home and found 44-year-old Fred Oesterreich laid out on the floor. He had been shot to death. Nearby, they could hear the woman's screams coming from a locked closet. After they managed to open the door using keys which they'd found laying on the floor, they found 42-year-old Walburga Dolly Oesterreich inside. Dolly explained to the officers that both she and her husband were victims of a robbery that went wrong. Fred's diamond watch and money left in their bedroom had been taken, but otherwise nothing else appeared to have been disturbed. Police would immediately suspect that Dolly knew more than what she was telling them. However, it would take almost 10 years for them to learn just how crazy and unexpected the true story was. Born Walburga Korschel on the 12th of June 1880, not much is known about her past, except that she was born to German immigrant parents. It's unclear if she was born in Imperial Germany, but she grew up in Milwaukee alongside a community densely made up of German immigrants. Later, she would find work in a textile mill owned by Fred Oesterreich. Fred was also a German immigrant who had found success in textile manufacturing and was 2 years her senior. Dolly was said to be an attractive, charismatic young woman and would unsurprisingly catch Fred's attention. And by the time Dolly was just 17 years old, the pair had wed. Despite now being the wife of her former boss, Dolly would remain positively viewed by her former colleagues, often calmly resolving labour disputes that Fred's impatient and unlikable manner could otherwise handle. Their marriage was pretty much rocky from the outset. Dolly would often yearn for Fred's attention, but he would heavily focus himself into his work, neglecting Dolly in the process. And to add to this, Fred was said to be verbally abusive to Dolly. Even though the pair had troubles, they would have a child together named Raymond in August 1900, although tragically he would pass away just shy of his 10th birthday in July 1910. The death of their son sent the pair on a downward spiral. Fred would immerse himself into his work even more, and he would find solace at the bottom of a bottle. Dolly, meanwhile, effectively mourning alone, would begin to see herself as a motherly figure at the textile mill and seek attention from other men to make up for the lack of affection she was getting at home. Rumours were rife that Dolly had been having extramarital affairs, although this was never truly confirmed. That is until 1913. One day, Dolly wanted to use her sewing machine, only to find that it wasn't working. Dolly asked her husband to have someone come round to repair the machine. Fred agreed and chose to send 17-year-old Otto Sanhuber. Very little is known about Otto, except for the fact that he was orphaned as a young child and that he was employed by Fred as a handyman who would help with odd jobs around Fred's business. When Otto arrived, he was greeted by Dolly, who was only wearing a robe and stockings. She took him upstairs to the bedroom, where the sewing machine was. Here, Otto would be seduced by Dolly's advances, and the pair entered into an affair. For a while, the pair would meet up at hotels, and Otto would even visit the home while Fred was out on business. However, this was unsustainable, as neighbours would begin to suspect what Dolly and Otto were up to, although Dolly would explain to them that the man who she would often be seen with was just his, quote, vagabond half-brother. Not wanting their steamy affair to stop, Dolly came up with an idea that would seem utterly ridiculous to most sane-minded people. She suggested to Otto that he quit working for Fred and move into her home, where he could live in the attic. What was even more insane was that Otto agreed. Otto saw positives in this deal. He aspired to become a writer and this offer would mean that he could have more time to focus on his writing. Not only this, but he could continue his affair with Dolly without prying eyes. Over the next 5 years, Otto would leave the attic when Fred left for work to spend time with Dolly, and at night time, when Fred was home, he would remain in his secret room in the Oesterreich's attic, reading books, writing science fiction, and dabbling in making bathtub gin to pass the time. Dolly would mail Otto's completed stories, with him using a pseudonym, to potential publishers, in the hopes of having his books published. While Otto had to remain in complete silence during the hours Fred was around, Fred would notice strange things happening around the home. He would occasionally hear banging from the ceiling, as well as picking up on food and his cigars strangely going missing. However, each time he confronted Dolly with his concerns, she would brush him off, blaming his heavy drinking and saying he was misremembering things. For a while, Fred believed Dolly, but would eventually convince himself that either he was going mad or that his home was haunted. In 1918, Fred presented Dolly with a problem. He had decided that now was the time for the pair to sell their Milwaukee home and move to Los Angeles. After much discussion, Dolly agreed, but she convinced Fred that they could only move into a home that contained an attic. They found a home which overlooked Sunset Boulevard that met Dolly's requirements, and before the married couple moved in, Dolly sent Otto there in advance to ensure that he could get himself set up in the attic prior to their arrival. This went off without a hitch, and Dolly and Otto would continue their unorthodox affair for the next 4 years. During this time, Fred would continue to notice the same strange patterns, and as a result, he would become more withdrawn and abusive towards Dolly. The arguments the two would have would become more intense, and this would come to a head on the 22nd of August, 1922. That night, Dolly and a likely drunken Fred got into another heated argument. Otto, who had listened to every fight the pair had since moving in, was strictly under instruction not to do anything by Dolly, who said she could handle Fred's outbursts. However, this fight seemed more intense than the previous arguments. Otto, fearing for Dolly's safety, snapped and left the attic and climbed down into the home. He entered Dolly and Fred's bedroom and found Fred's two .25 caliber pistols. He gathered the firearms and made his way towards Fred and Dolly. As he entered the doorway into the living room, Fred felt a presence behind him. Upon turning around, he immediately recognized the man standing there before him, pistols aimed at him. Suddenly it all made sense to Fred. Otto abruptly quitting his job. All the noises he could hear, the food going missing, his cigars disappearing. He wasn't imagining it after all. Fred flew into a rage and lunged at Otto. Otto fired off one shot, but it missed. The pair then struggled, but Otto was able to fire off another 3 rounds, 2 hitting Fred's body and 1 in the head. Knowing that the commotion would attract attention from the neighbours, Dolly quickly hatched a plan to cover their tracks. She removed Fred's diamond watch and handed this, along with money from her bedroom, to Otto and sent him back into the attic to hide. But before he left, Otto locked Dolly inside a closet and threw the keys aside and retreated upstairs. When police arrived, they had no idea that Otto was inside the house and only came across Fred's lifeless body and Dolly locked inside the closet. They immediately began to ask her questions about the events that night, whereby Dolly told them that they had been robbed by unknown perpetrators. They shot Fred and locked her inside the closet before fleeing. As I mentioned, the police were immediately suspicious of Dolly's story. As well as the home being relatively undisturbed, Dolly had stated that she and Fred had never argued throughout their marriage, something which even I can attest is highly unusual. While they believed that Dolly was responsible and that they were sure no robbers locked Dolly inside the closet, they couldn't work out how she could have done this herself. They never considered for a second that they weren't alone in the home at the time. With Fred out of the picture, and the police seemingly unable to tie Dolly to his death, she was now free to continue living in her Los Angeles home. Moreover, Otto was now able to leave the attic and live life with Dolly freely and publicly. Or so you would think. Dolly astonishingly convinced Otto to continue their existing arrangement, and after moving home again shortly after Fred's murder, he would continue to live inside the attic. Essentially, Otto had become a live-in sex slave of Dolly's. Otto would have some of his stories published, and with the little money he made from this, he would purchase a typewriter to continue his works. Incredibly, Dolly would begin seeing other men. She began seeing her estate attorney, Herman Shapiro, who she would gift him with Fred's own diamond watch, the same one that Dolly claimed had been stolen. Shapiro, who was aware of Fred's murder and recognised the watch as being the same, confronted Dolly, who explained that she had been mistaken and that she had actually found it after the police had left and failed to report it, as she didn't think it was important enough to do so. Another man who would enter Dolly's life would be a businessman named Roy Klum. Dolly may have had ulterior motives with this relationship, however, as she wanted to get rid of Fred's pistols and asked Roy to dispose of one of them. She told Roy that the gun used to kill Fred was similar to his, and that having the gun around was too painful a memory. Roy agreed to her request and threw the gun into the La Brea tar pits. With regards to the other gun, she told the same sob story to a neighbour, who agreed to bury the firearm in his backyard. Eventually, Dolly's relationship with Roy Klum would turn sour, and she would break things off with him. Whether it was due to his own suspicion of Dolly or otherwise, he went to the local police station to tell them of the gun he disposed of in the La Brea tar pits. Police conducted a search and were able to recover the firearm. However, they were unable to determine whether the gun was the murder weapon, as it had become too corroded. Regardless, on the 12th of July 1923, the same day the gun was found, they arrested Dolly Oesterreich of suspicion of murdering her husband Fred. When news of Dolly's arrest hit the headlines, the neighbour immediately told police of the second gun in his backyard, and they recovered this also. Again, the gun was too corroded to be confirmed as the murder weapon. Neither Shapiro nor Klum knew of Otto Sanhuber. They probably didn't know of each other. However, for Dolly, she still had to get food and supplies to Otto. With Klum unavailable, she spoke to Shapiro and told him to buy groceries and take them to her house and to tap on the ceiling, where her vagabond half-brother would come down to collect the goods. Shapiro, while surprised by this, agreed and did as he was told. When he visited the home and tapped on the ceiling as instructed, Otto came down, as he would normally do. Otto, however, starved of human interaction for so many years, with the exception of Dolly of course, began to talk openly about his relationship with Dolly, and went deep into detail about what they had been up to and what had truly happened to Fred Oesterreich. Shapiro, less than impressed, ordered Otto Sanhuber to leave Dolly's home and never to return. Unsurprisingly, Otto put up no resistance and thus ended his decade-long relationship with Dolly Oesterreich. Herman Shapiro would move in with Dolly shortly after she was placed on bail pending her trial. Unfortunately for her, he remained tight-lipped about what he knew about her. The case against Dolly would eventually be dropped, as police were still unaware of Otto's presence that night, and they still lacked sufficient evidence. As with Klum, things eventually turned sour for both Herman Shapiro and Dolly Oesterreich, and in 1930, the pair split. Soon after this, Shapiro went to police and told them everything he knew about Dolly and informed them of Otto Sanhuber. With this new information, police again arrested Dolly Oesterreich on a conspiracy charge and tracked down Otto and arrested him too for the murder of Fred Oesterreich. Dolly recruited the services of Jerry Giesler, a famed attorney of his time, and was able to secure a hung jury for Dolly, meaning she walked free.
Her indictment would eventually be dropped in 1936. For Otto Sanhuber, who was now 43 years old, despite his defence explaining the living conditions he had endured for almost a decade, and that he had effectively been enslaved by Dolly, a jury would still find him guilty of manslaughter. Luckily for Otto, even though he was found guilty, the statute of limitations had expired on Fred Oesterreich's case, meaning that he too also walked free. The media would dub this the Batman case, due to him living in a secluded, cave-like attic. This was before the Caped Crusader graced magazines and movie theatres. Otto would eventually change his name to Walter Klein and move to Canada, where he would marry. Not much else is known about his life other than this. For Dolly Oesterreich, she remained in Los Angeles, and she too would remarry a man named Ray Burt Hedrick in 1961, after almost 30 years together. She would die, aged 75, just 2 weeks after her wedding. The things we do for love, eh? I don't know about you, but I can hear the immortal words of the late Meatloaf floating around in my head. In all seriousness though, this was an insane case to study. Otto clearly was infatuated with Dolly, and having had no paternal figures in his life, he may have saw Dolly as a maternal figure. Dolly was known to be maternal towards the staff at her husband's textile mill, and as Otto was several years younger than she was, it wouldn't surprise me if she felt some kind of twisted parental attraction to him. But even still, the whole reason for his consensual captivity was to avoid Fred. How he agreed to continue this after his death is utterly beyond me. Maybe it's just the way it was in those days. Who knows?
Today's case takes us to San Diego, California, where at 9:22 p.m. on the 6th of November 2000, emergency services would receive a telephone call from 24-year-old Kristen Rossum, who found her husband, 26-year-old Gregory DeVillers, lying unresponsive in bed. Kristen would be talked through CPR while she waited for an ambulance to arrive, but it would be to no avail. Upon taking Greg to hospital, he'd be pronounced dead around an hour later. What was initially portrayed as Greg tragically taking his own life quickly turned into something far more sinister, involving lies, infidelity, and murder. Born on the 25th of October 1976, Kristen Rossum was born into a family of high reputation. Her father, Ralph, was a professor and former member of the Reagan administration, where he worked within the Department of Justice and was highly respected within the field of constitutional and juvenile law. Her mother, Constance, was a former high-power advertisement executive. Given their status, it was only natural that Ralph and his wife Constance would impose high expectations upon their children. Kristen, being the eldest of three, perhaps felt this more than others. In a bid to get her daughter to stand out from the rest, Constance introduced Kristen to modelling and ballet from a young age. Kristen was particularly talented in regard to the latter, performing in several stage productions and even ousting a professional ballet dancer from their role in the Nutcracker. But her career in ballet would be cut short after tearing ligaments in her ankle and sustaining a stress fracture, forcing her to quit. The injury caused Kristen to slip into depression, and by high school, she had begun to experiment in drink and drugs. Eventually, Kristen became addicted to methamphetamines. She would steal checks and use her parents' credit card without their knowledge to support her habit. Although Ralph and Constance would eventually learn of their daughter's substance abuse, leading to several arguments. These fights would occur often, and on occasion police became involved. Kristen had been arrested on one occasion after her parents found drugs on her possession. She would enroll into the University of Redlands in 1994, hoping to start afresh, but her demons would resurface. Kristen would self-harm, and on one occasion, she had made a failed attempt at ending her own life. By 1995, Kristin was at rock bottom. She had dropped out of school and ran away from home. She would make her way to Tijuana, where on the public bridge crossing the US-Mexico border, she would meet the man she would go on to marry. Greg de Villas, who was 22 in 1995, saw Kristin while travelling to Tijuana with his brothers. He was immediately attracted to Kristin, and she would agree to spend the day with him. She would later agree to go back to his apartment with him. The pair entered into a whirlwind romance. She had effectively moved into Greg's home that he shared with his brother and friend. She opened up about her troubles with drugs, and Greg, who was staunchly against drugs, agreed to help her get clean. It wouldn't take long before items would go missing from Greg's home. Items such as family jewellery and checks belonging to Greg's brother Jerome had disappeared. Suspicions were firmly on Kristin, but she denied it vehemently. However, they would later be found in her purse. Jerome would move out soon after this breach of trust, but Greg would continue to stand by Kristin, who was still keen to help her get back on the straight and narrow. Greg was utterly obsessed with Kristin and was prepared to do all he could to make things work. For a time, things seemed well, as Kristin got clean, and she had successfully enrolled into the San Diego State University, graduating summa cum laude in 1998. That same year, she was hired full-time to work as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, where she had previously been an intern. Greg saw a future with Kristin and proposed to her, to which she accepted. While Greg was excited at the prospect of marriage, Kristin wasn't sure of spending her life with Greg, telling her mother roughly a month before the wedding that she had doubts. Her mother simply put this down to nerves and convinced her to press ahead with the wedding. And so the pair married on the 5th of June 1999. Just months after tying the knot, Kristin was telling people that she felt suffocated in her relationship and that perhaps she had made a mistake. In truth, soon after joining the medical examiner's office, a new man had come into her life. Dr. Michael Robertson, a native Australian, began working at the medical examiner's office soon after Kristin went full-time. Colleagues observed the pair openly flirting and sharing lunch breaks together, causing rumours to spread around the office. These rumours were not unfounded, as Kristin and Michael, who was also a married man at the time, began a passionate affair. By October 2000, Kristin had resumed her methamphetamine use, and Robertson discovered traces of the drug in her desk. Part of her job was to log confiscated drugs into the medical office, giving her ample access. But rather than dismiss her, he decided to flush the drug down a toilet and cover for her. Greg was unaware of his wife's infidelity and resumption of meth use until the beginning of November. A couple of days before Greg died, Kristin's parents had visited for dinner. Ralph commented that on that night, Greg drank heavily and was loud. He also obsessed over roses that he bought for Kristin's birthday a few days earlier, commenting that all but one of the roses had shed its petals. The night before the 6th of November, Greg found a love letter that Michael Robertson had written to Kristin. An argument ensued, with Greg threatening to expose Kristin's affair with Robertson, as well as her drug abuse to her work. Kristin told investigators that on the day of Greg's death, she woke up to find him very groggy. She said that he was so out of it that she called Greg's place of work and left a voice message to let them know he wouldn't be in that day. Greg's boss attempted to contact him at around 10 AM and again just before midday, but there was no answer. At work, Kristin was seen speaking with Robertson in his office, looking visibly upset. She left at around midday to visit a Vons store, where she bought some items and returned home to have lunch with Greg. Kristin said it was during this time that Greg admitted to her that he had taken a mixture of oxycodone and clonazepam. Kristin would later tell police that the drugs belonged to her, as these were purchased a couple of years prior, while she was attempting to get off the meth. After lunch, she returned to work, saying that Greg had gone back to bed. Kristin said she returned to work, but was seen leaving again at about 2:30 PM, She saw Robertson again that afternoon before returning home at around 5 p.m. An hour and a half later, Kristen left home again to run some errands before returning back between 8 and 8:30 p.m. She would then take what she called a long bath, kissing a sleeping Greg on the forehead. Afterwards, she got into bed, and it was at this point that she noticed that Greg was cold to the touch. When paramedics arrived, they found Greg de Villiers on the floor with rose petals all around his body, with a wedding photo on a pillow and pages from Kristen's diary, which revealed her plans to leave him. Rossum briefly told paramedics that Greg hadn't taken any drugs, but quickly changed her tune, telling them, the police and the hospital, that he had consumed oxycodone and clonazepam. She also explained to friends and police that the roses were a kind of message to her, signifying that their relationship was over. Initially, it appeared as though Greg, consumed with sadness at the prospect of losing his wife, couldn't continue to live on if she was not a part of it. It seemed as though he had ended things on his own terms, and this appeared to be the case when Greg was autopsied by the very medical examiner's office both Kristen and Michael Robertson worked at. They would find traces of oxycodone and clonazepam in his system, confirming what Kristen had said earlier. But as the days went by, questions would begin to be raised, which would ultimately change the direction of the investigation into a homicide case. For starters, Greg's family refused to accept that Greg had consumed drugs knowingly, given how anti-drugs he was. They were convinced of foul play, particularly Greg's brother Jerome. In fact, Jerome was so unconvinced that his brother couldn't have done this to himself, he secretly recorded conversations between Kristen and himself, hoping to find something incriminating. Additionally, he would constantly badger police to investigate further into Greg de Villiers' death, something which would eventually pay off. Police learned that the person responsible for handling Greg's autopsy was actually Michael Robertson. Understandably, this caused many an eyebrow to raise. Investigators also learned that Kristen had also agreed to donate Greg's skin and eyes mere hours after he had died. She had also arranged to have Greg cremated soon after his death. Worried about the obvious conflict of interest, police arranged for the remaining of Greg's samples to be sent to a private toxicologist in Los Angeles for more extensive testing. The results were intriguing. While oxycodone and clonazepam were again present in Greg's samples, Los Angeles toxicologists also found something else: 57 nanograms of fentanyl, which is 7 times the normal amount needed to kill a man. If you're wondering why such a high amount of fentanyl wasn't picked up by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, well, the answer's pretty simple. Fentanyl isn't a drug which is commonly prescribed, and so many medical examiners' offices don't test for this. As it so happens, the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office is one of those. The presence of fentanyl raised further questions. Given the amount found in his system, it would take a much smaller amount required to immobilize Greg in a short amount of time. Why then did Kristen tell officers that he was groggy for much of the day? Not only this, but fluid was found in Greg's lungs, which suggested that he would have been unconscious for what they estimate to be between 6 and 12 hours. And so if that was the case, how did he end up dead in a bed of roses that he supposedly made as some kind of final dramatic statement to his wife? She would say it was an homage to her favourite movie, American Beauty, but police were less than convinced. What was even more interesting was that searches of Kristen and Greg's flat turned up no fentanyl container. Naturally, questions would be raised as to how high levels of fentanyl were in his system, with no container in sight. And then there's the night in question. When Kristen made the 911 call, emergency services only took 3 minutes to arrive. The operator would guide Kristen through CPR while she waited, but upon their arrival, they found her in another room. They noted that Kristen didn't appear as though she was tired from performing CPR, and no redness was detected on the chest of Greg, which is typical to see when chest compressions have been carried out. And not only this, but the 911 call was listened to, and it didn't sound as though Kristen was actively performing CPR. At the hospital that night, one of the investigators initially on the scene stated that a man arrived to see Kristen, and witnesses stated that the couple were seen sharing a passionate embrace. They would soon learn that the man was Michael Robertson. Police now wanted to look at both Kristen and Michael more closely. Once they discovered Kristen's previous drug habit, they decided to carry out an audit at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. They searched through the logs of confiscated contraband and learned that of all the drugs obtained, some were missing. Unsurprisingly, these were oxycodone, clonazepam, methamphetamines, and fentanyl. Robertson would later admit that he knew that Kristen had stolen drugs from the office, finding traces in her desk as I mentioned earlier. However, he decided not to say anything to his superiors, opting to protect her instead. Following these revelations, both Kristen and Michael Robertson were fired from their positions a month after Greg's death. Police would also seize computers known to have been used by both Rossum and Robertson. These were searched thoroughly with a fine-tooth comb, and what they found was rather interesting. They found hundreds of email communications between the pair, expressing their feelings towards one another. But this wasn't it. Examinations on Michael Robertson's computer revealed files concerning fentanyl. While this on its own isn't unusual for someone working in a medical examiner's office, this wasn't a usual situation. What raised eyebrows even further was that police discovered that shortly before Greg's death, both Robertson and Rossum were sent to a presentation about fentanyl, paid for by the medical examiner's office. The presentation discussed the dangers of fentanyl and other key facts about the drug. They were given separate rooms, but police discovered that Robertson paid for another room for the couple to share. And finally, earlier I briefly mentioned about the roses that Greg apparently bought for Christine for her birthday. According to her, the rose petals found near Greg were supposed to have been from one of the few surviving ones. However, police had made a fascinating discovery when looking into her purchases on the day Greg died. When she visited the Von store that day, she paid with cash. Now, usually without a receipt or CCTV footage, it would be almost impossible to trace what she had purchased. But Kristen made one critical mistake. She used a Von store card to obtain a discount. These store cards record each individual item purchased, and when police checked her transaction history, they learned among the items bought, a single red rose was paid for on the 6th of November 2000, the very day Greg died. In May 2001, Michael Robertson returned to Australia to look after his sick mother. While he was under investigation, no charges had been brought against him at that point of time. But as for Kristen, she would be arrested on the 25th of June, over 7 months since Greg had died. She had been charged with the first-degree murder of Greg de Villiers. Bail was set at a staggering $1.25 million, and she would spend roughly 6 months in prison, while her parents worked to raise funds to post her bail. They would eventually remortgage their home, and she'd be released on bail in January 2002 as a result. While waiting for her trial to begin, Kristen would continue to protest her innocence to the media, sticking firm to the story that Greg had ended his own life in a dramatic manner. This line of argument was one the defense used at her trial. But on the 13th of November 2002, she was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Greg de Villiers, and in December that same year, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After Michael Robertson returned to Australia to look after his dying mother in 2001, he remained in Australia, where he remarried and continues to work as a forensic toxicology consultant. In 2013, an article was released revealing that in 2006, a warrant was issued for his arrest by US authorities and a $100,000 bail set should he return to the United States. Suffice it to say, he hasn't touched US soil since leaving. It was reported that in 2014, Michael Robertson gave evidence as a key witness in the trial of Gerard Baden Clay, who was convicted of murdering his wife, Alison, in 2012. It was not mentioned to the jury in that trial that he was named as an unindicted co-conspirator regarding the Greg de Villiers murder. Michael has always maintained his innocence. As for Kristin, the de Villiers family would sue her for wrongful death in 2006 and be awarded $100 million, although this would later be reduced down to $10 million, plus a $4.5 million compensatory award, which was unchanged from the original decision. The San Diego Medical Examiner's Office were also told to pay $1.5 million to the de Villiers family. Kristin made numerous attempts to appeal her conviction, and in 2010, a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that her defense should have challenged the forensic tests carried out by the prosecution by requesting that they carry out their own, which they failed to do. An order was submitted to look into whether this failing by her defense could have affected her trial, but by 2011, the Court of Appeals withdrew its opinion, instead replacing it with a 1-paragraph statement. They cited that under a new US Supreme Court precedent, her petition was denied. To this day, Kristin resides at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Like Michael, she continues to deny any wrongdoing.
Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please give this video a like, and if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your continued support is invaluable to the growth of the channel, and I'm very grateful to each and every one of you. Until next time, take care and goodbye for now.